Thank you. You know, it's wonderful to be back here again, except, I don't know, somebody must not like me because they put me behind Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro. Young, dynamic, interesting people, and I'm old. But I want to tell you something. I am so proud of the American people who saw through all that gaslighting and picked Donald Trump as president. Now, the people showed that they were tired of the lawfare and the crime and the illegal immigration and the class warfare and the child abuse and men playing in women's sports and going in women's locker rooms. Just crazy stuff. You know, I was in Europe and I was talking to a bunch of the Europeans about America. And I said, what do you think about America these days? And the resounding answer I got was, we think you lost your minds. Now, if the Europeans think that, we are really in trouble. But it's time for a correction, and I think that correction is occurring. And, you know, it was saddening for so many of us when Trump lost in 2020. Somebody said he didn't lose, but here's the point. If he had won, he would be coming to the end of his second term right now. Now they got to deal with him for another 4 years. That should teach them. But, you know, sometimes a failure is a setup for success. You know, I remember some years ago, I was asked urgently to come to South Africa to help perform a separation of a set of conjoined twins. They were joined at the back of the head, just like the first set from Germany. And, but the place where it was being done, Medunsa, was not a place that had all the modern equipment and all the kinds of things that you would have in a tertiary medical center. But people were donating very sophisticated equipment from all over the world, and we were able to put together an amazing team in a place like that to carry out what would be a very complex operative procedure. And it involved hypothermic arrest, where we would cool the body temperature, pump all the blood out, stop the hearts. We could do that for up to an hour without loss of function. But when we got to that part of the operation and the cardiothoracic surgeons opened the chest, one of the babies had a heart that was non-functional. And the reason that they had been deteriorating, which is why they needed to get this operation done so quickly, they weren't sure why the babies were deteriorating. It was because the one was doing all the pumping for both of them. So as they were growing, they were going into congestive heart failure. And obviously, we completed the operation. The one with no heart function was dead. But the other one was actually doing okay, and we were pleased with that. Except that the next day, that one started having a lot of seizures and all kinds of metabolic problems, and over the 48-hour period, died. Well, it turned out that that one had no kidney function, because the other one had the kidney function. So one had the heart function, one had the kidney function. They were symbiotic. They couldn't live apart. They couldn't live together. And I must admit, on my way back home, I was devastated. I was just devastated. I'm not used to things not going well. And I would say anybody could fail. I didn't have to come all the way over here from America in order to fail. But 2 years later, there was another case from Zambia, twins that were joined at the top of the head facing in opposite directions, something we call type 2 vertical craniopicus. There had been 13 attempts to separate twins like that historically, none of which had been successful. So we studied the case extensively, and when I went to do that case, I was so thrilled. Over the operating room, there was a sign that said, "God bless Joseph and Luca Banda." They were having prayer service and song service. I asked them to bring a stereo system into the operating room because I love to listen to music while I'm operating. 19 hours into the surgery, we were only 3/4 of the way finished. The part that remained was so complex. There were blood vessels going in every direction. It looked like a bowl of spaghetti, and you have to try to separate them. Well, we stopped the operation. I said, maybe what we can do is cover it over with skin, leave them joined, come back in a few months, the vessels will have delineated themselves, and then we can complete the separation. And the doctors from Zambia and South Africa said, that's a great idea. And I know it would work at Johns Hopkins. But we can't keep a partially separated set of twins alive. They'll die. Now I really felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. I didn't have all my fancy equipment that I have at Hopkins. I had my scalpel, my surgical loops, and a prayer on my lips. And I went in and said, Lord, it's up to you. And over the next several hours, I was intensely operating. I honestly don't even remember what I did. But later on, the other neurosurgeons said, we couldn't believe what you were doing. But when we made the final cut that separated those twins, over the stereo system came the Hallelujah chorus. And everybody had goosebumps. And when we finished the operation, one of the twins opened his eyes, reached up for the endotracheal tube. By the time we got to the ICU, the other one did the same thing. Within 2 days, they were extubated. Within 3 days, they were eating. Within 2 weeks, they were crawling. And today, they are normal adults doing well. But here's the thing. That second operation would not have been possible without all the equipment and the teams that had been put together for the first operation where the twins were not viable. And this is the same kind of thing that just happened. If Donald Trump had won in 2020, we would have had a problem. We would have had to continue to deal with the COVID and all kinds of things, and things would not have been accomplished, and he would have been blamed for everything under the sun. That didn't happen. People were able to see side by side the conservative philosophy versus the progressive philosophy, and what kind of lives they lead for people. That was a tremendous blessing, and that was God's way of helping us to see who we were as a nation. This is an amazing nation that we live in. It doesn't matter where your ancestors came from. I don't care if they came from Ireland or France or China or Africa. You're better off in this country than you would be in that place. And this is our country, all of us together. And one of the reasons that Trump won is because he believed in something that our founders believed in. It's called the common good. What's good for everybody, not what's good for this group versus that group. And it took a little while, but aren't you glad that all these corporations and large companies are starting to see that DEI needs to DIE? And so many people marched, protested, led, and even died so that we could have equality in this country. That's what we want, equality, not equity, not the same outcome, but the same opportunities for all of our people. That's the thing that really made America into a great nation. But we have those who want to fundamentally change us into something else. And they are spending their time trying to divide us. You know, one of the main tactics of socialists is to create class warfare. Have you noticed that? Rich people are evil, they try to tell you. Guess what? If there were no rich people, we wouldn't have this beautiful convention center. We wouldn't have shopping centers, universities, libraries, all kinds of things. It's fine to be rich. Just make sure that you're willing to do good things with your money and share it a little bit. And America has always been at the top of the list in terms of people who are willing to do that. And as long as people have an opportunity to do well, isn't that what it's all about? You know, I remember as a youngster, one of the things that I hated was poverty. You know, some people hate snakes and rats. I hated poverty. It bothered the heck out of me. But you know, when I started doing a lot of reading, and particularly reading about successful people, and I began to understand that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you, then the poverty didn't bother me anymore because I knew it was only temporary and that I could change it and that I could work as hard as I wanted to or as little as I wanted to and that I would benefit from it. Isn't that the American dream? Isn't that what it's all about? And yet, look at all the people who want to divide us on the basis of race. What a silly thing to be concerned about. You know, I don't know anybody who has the ability to change their race. They can't change their color. But what you can control is your character and what kind of person that you are. And it seems to me that that's the thing that we should be concerning ourselves about, particularly in this time in which we're living with people doing so many silly things. Some of us need to recognize also that we are not enemies. Take the first letter of each of those things, W-A-N-E, wane. We've let hatred and division wax for a long time. It's time to let it wane now. You know, we just passed Thanksgiving, and a lot of people on the other side of the aisle were saying, if somebody in your family voted for Trump, don't invite them for Thanksgiving. Don't go over their house for Thanksgiving. You know what? That is pure evil, stimulated by the devil. And we have to be the ones who realize that we are friends and neighbors and colleagues And when we work together, there are very few things that we're incapable of. You know, when you think about what God has given us, which is the gift of our brain, the human brain, the most sophisticated organ system in the universe. And guess what? As a neurosurgeon, I operated on people from every continent, every race. And I can tell you, when I peeled that scalp down and took off that bone flap, I couldn't tell what color they were, because the brains are the same, and the brains are the things that make you who you are, not your skin color, not your hair, not the shape of your nose. And the other thing that is so vitally important for us to understand is that we are a nation whose foundation is God. That is the reason that we went from a ragtag bunch of militiamen to the pinnacle of the world in record time. It was because of a relationship with God. You know, I think of the story of the bulletproof Washington. Many of you know that story. George Washington was a courier during the French and Indian War for General Braddock. All the couriers were killed. They were shot to death. George Washington had 2 horses shot from beneath him. He had 4 bullet holes in his coat, bullet fragments in his hair, but no wounds. And years later, after the war, Washington was back in the area. He wasn't president yet, but one of the Indian chiefs who had been involved in the war, who was elderly and near death, heard that Washington was going to be there. He asked his braves to bring him to where Washington was. He wanted to see him. And they brought him into Washington's presence. And he said to Washington, "Sir, I am an expert marksman, and I shot you 17 times. And my men shot you. And pretty soon I told them to stop wasting their bullets. And I just wanted to be in the presence of the man who is protected by the Great Spirit above." And that story used to be in all of our history books until it became politically incorrect. And then there's the story of the Battle of Long Island when Washington was down to his last platoon. The American Revolutionary War was about to end. General Howe had them surrounded by land and by sea. They were going to wipe out the last of the resistance. Meteorologic records indicate that on that same night, a mysterious heavy fog fell over the area, remained there throughout the night and into the next day, providing cover for Washington and his men to be able to escape. Some people say it was a coincidence. I say it was God. And we must remember what it means when we say that we are one nation under God. We must never forget that relationship. And it's time to come back to it. We've had a chance to see what happens when we put God in the background. We spiral downward. We become enemies. We confuse our children about their gender. We have drag trains in elementary schools. We have men in women's locker rooms and playing women's sports. We lose all of our common sense. All of it is there for us to remember. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't talk about God in public. And remember, it is okay to live by godly principles of loving your neighbor, of caring for those who can't care for themselves, of developing your God-given talents to the utmost so that you become valuable to the people around you, of having values and principles that govern your life. And I'll tell you, 2 weeks ago I was with President Trump, and I said, what are you taking to give you all this energy? Because I need some of it too. And he said, you may be surprised what he said. He said, it's God. I beat you to it.